Vehicle? Yeah. And I
Welcome to UFO Undercover with your host, Joe Montaldo.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UFO Undercover. As Natasha says, I am your host, Joe Montaldo. To all our friends all around the world, welcome to the show tonight. I hope everyone is having a good day, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are on our beautiful blue planet. And remember, people, have some fun. Just don't let the abomination get to you. And on that note, everybody, I want to introduce our guest this evening. Randy KOPPANG is with us. Most of the regular listeners should know who he is. He's done work with Melinda Leslie. He's got a actually, I was going to ask him about the book because I believe it's still available to the general public. It's a good book. Y'all should get out there and get it. Guys, it's rare that we get guests that come on that actually talk about what we're going to be discussing tonight, which is military abductions and a few other things that we're going to get into. But it's not that common of a thing with you. I know you'll hear a lot of abduction stuff, and we'll probably even touch on that tonight. And I know y'all hear a lot of the ufologists that come on and do their usual spiel about whatever it is they happen to be working on or doing or involved with at the time. But these are one of my personal favorite topics because it's one of the things that the ICOR organization is really deep in researching at the present time, along with regular alien abduction and contact. But it's something that we've actually devoted part of the organization to now, is actually getting into the military abduction stuff quite a bit more. Randy's book, Camouflage Through Limited Disclosure, I believe it's still available all over the place, but we'll get him on in a minute and let him tell you about it. Randy, how you doing tonight?
Very good, Joe. Thank you once again for inviting me to be on your program. In fact, the first thing I wanted to say was that I perceive this as yet another of our civilian class disclosure moments. So we're about to do it.
I wanted to tell you something right now.
Yeah, what?
Your last interview with me is the #1 interview on our network for this year.
You don't say, really?
I was surprised because Melinda Leslie's was way up there, and a couple other ones were way up there, in the 6,000 and 10,000 downloads off of whatchamacallit, and off of GoDaddy and the rest of our sites, which puts it up in about 200,000-300,000 range. And I was amazed. I was amazed.
Well,
the other day I was pulling stats to find out what my top 5 shows were for the year, and it just popped up, and I was like, well, and I gotta tell Randy this when I talk to him because it's really good, and it tells you though what the interest is because if you go look at my personal top 10 shows for UFO Undercover and the network's top 4 shows, all have to do with either military abduction or types of alien abduction. So it tells me there's a hard, fast, strong audience out there looking for this and looking for the truth, or at least looking for some answers, which I'm hoping we can provide them some of tonight. Now, I know I asked you before we came live, I know you heard Melinda. Ladies and gentlemen, let me clarify, Melinda Leslie, who's a friend of both of ours, and a mutual researcher, I should say, was on Coast to Coast about a month and a half ago. She did an excellent interview on military abduction. Y'all should go catch it. I think archives on Coast to Coast are always posted. Sooner or later, I'll write to Coast and ask if I can have a copy of it because they allow me every now and then I can get a copy to different shows, stuff that the organization is working on, and see if they'll let us have a copy and we'll get it posted to the internet. But it is there. Y'all can go hear it. It was a good interview. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I only got to catch the first 2 hours of it, but she seemed to be very poised and very pointed in the interview, which was a very good thing. And I got to say, she took control when Whitley was on. I was impressed with that.
Well, that was kind of like out of left field.
Yeah.
They didn't tell her at all that they were going to do that.
No, I had ran into it. I found out by accident. I was on the Coast site that day, and about 2 hours after that, she actually called me to tell me about it. And I was just amazed. I was like, damn, she's going to get to talk with Whitley Strieber about his military abductions. I was like, what a lucky girl. And she did a damn good job with that part of the interview. She, you would have never known that, she actually really, liked Whitley. And it was really surprising.
Well, yeah, so I think she kind of overdid that part because she's known him for a long time, and they are. Well, I mean, I think there is a mutual respect as fellow, prominent members within the UFO community. Put it that way, because she never runs into him. He's rather kind of like obscure obscure, frankly. He stays out of the limelight because he is a well-known person in his own right, independent of ufology. However, there was a true enigma that I don't know that George was aware of, which all came together there, which maybe I should say something about that to help give greater insight into what was really implied. It didn't come across because there wasn't enough said about it, and he wasn't on there long enough. But about a year before that, I think it was maybe, in fact, a year and a half or so, between a year and a half and a year before that, Melinda ran into him at a special event here in L.A., and he had been quite a bit of a recluse prior to this, and it was one of the first times that he had come out and appeared at an event. It was not a conference, it was just a special event. And he was asked to come there and participate in it. So she went down there specifically to talk to him because she's always wanted to interview him specifically about those things in a formal way with regards to the book she plans to come out with someday. And he really surprised her because prior to that, he wanted nothing to do with publicizing any of this kind of like human intervention types of experiences overtly. He didn't want to have anything to do with that, even though in at least one or two of his books he refers in a generic sense, sort of, about the enigma of the fact these inexplicable things had happened. But when she approached him to go formally on the record, even to the degree of interviewing him anonymously, he actually didn't want to do it. So then she meets him at this event. He completely goes 180 degrees on that, tells her he is willing to do it, and says, no, I'm not even going to allow you to do it anonymously. If I'm going to do it, then you're going to use my name and everything, so send me an email and we'll follow through. Well, she tried to follow through, but then something else had happened and brought into a degree of capriciousness, I guess, because then nothing ever happened after that until finally one day he shows up on the program. I swear to God, it was really, really far out the way that worked. Yeah. Now we have to hand it to George, I guess, for persuading him to do it, but it was really an enigma between the two of us because we couldn't understand why, if he was really, overtly extending overtures to her about how willing he was to participate and cooperate with her, and then kind of like dropping the ball, then he comes on there, and in a way, the insight, in no way, I don't want anybody in the audience to think this is a criticism. It's not. It's actually an insight into the nature of trying to reconcile, the weird enigma of abduction on the one side, and then this other experience that comes in and intercedes in that, which basically confuses these people to the degree that they really, I think that, in Whitley's case, I think he's still confused.
Oh, yeah,
I think he's willing to concede the possibility that it's more understandable based on what Melinda, tried to bring to his attention. But I wasn't really convinced, frankly, as a researcher, as a peer review, I wasn't really convinced at the end that he was totally assimilating the significance of what he described. Because, for some people, it just has to sink in over a long period of time.
It does.
Because it's basically bringing in two situations that, I'm going to sound redundant because I'll probably use this word more than once, but it has to do with reconciling enigmas. And when you add, one enigma on top of another enigma, then, that results in confusion. So it's understandable.
No, it is, and I agree with you. I mean, we've had many discussions about Whitley before, and I do think that he is kind of confused on a few issues, and I think maybe confused isn't quite the right word, but seems to be lost in it. And sometimes I've seen early on with MILABS / abductees is the overlapping of memories, and it gets quite confusing. It even gets quite confusing for the researcher because I'll be sitting there listening to them, and they're describing military abduction, and all of a sudden, to me, it sounds like, well, wait a minute, now we've gone alien abduction here, and what the hell happened? And then I realized, what's going on is that the memories are overlapping. That bleed through, whatever you want to call it. And this seems to be seems to make it a lot harder for them to distinguish what's actually MILAB and what's actually alien abduction. But you get the ones that are quite solid, too, the ones that can distinguish quite easily between the two.
Well, without hypnosis or just straight memory. Actually, I wanted to mention something that I may be able to easily connect with that, what you just said, in light of something that we've brought up before, along the lines of how to discern, kind of like one experience from another experience vis-a-vis the work of one person in particular, and that is Dr. Jacobs. And I want to bring something to your attention that I rediscovered. I had this and forgot about it entirely until recently, and it comes from a reputable source, namely the nothing less than the Mutual UFO Network journal of April of 1998. And in this journal, this particular one, there is a very long, actually more than long. It's in fact 4 or 5 pages. It's a review of Dr. Jacobs' book that had come out at that time, which is the book that came out after Secret Life. In fact, I guess you could say it was kind of like a sequel to Secret Life, and this one was titled The Threat. Now, this review is amazing because the guy who did the review, and as I said, it's very extensive. It's more than just, kind of like a few paragraphs of a book review. It's actually a major article, featured article, about the significance of this book in light of abduction research. And I noticed that in the review, there were 2 passages by the reviewer where he himself arbitrarily decided that he had to mention on 2 occasions at 2 places in the review, of evidence that if you were to read it, or if I was to read it, or if Melinda was to read it, it would be very clear that what the guy was citing from this book were actually the human intervention or MILAB incidents. But in the eyes or the perceptions of Dr. Jacobs, he describes them in his own unique, kind of like biased way. Biased meaning that he has a perspective on his research that is similar to Bud Hopkins, but actually I think it's even more unique than even Bud Hopkins.
Yeah,
I think frankly Bud Hopkins is more open-minded about how to draw any conclusions whatsoever about their work. But Jacobs is rather kind of like focused on a certain way to interpret it. So I'm going to read one short paragraph from this review that the author mentioned. And when I read this, which is basically, paraphrasing from this book, when you hear what this independent reviewer wrote, it's very clear that at any time when we've ever heard of quotes attributed to Dr. Jacobs, where he claims that, well, in my clientele with abductees, I've never run into any of these human intervention cases. That's what he claims. He claims he told Melinda that directly. He's never run into them. Well, when I read this, it's very clear that actually he has run into them. But his issue is that he just doesn't want to attempt to try and explain them and define them in human terms.
Yeah, well, you're right. Personally, I think there might even be a little fear there, Randy.
It could be. So I'm going to read this. It says, this is what the reviewer says. Now, the operant word in this paragraph is the word hybrids, and of course, since then, Hopkins and Jacobs have come out with an entire book about, the transgenic being hybrids. And even then, 12 years ago, that was his major kind of like operant way to define virtually everything that's involved in this in terms of the hybrids. The guy says, the hybrids walk among us, though apparently the hybrids don't live among us yet. Sometimes they are given a few hours to wander here on Earth, where they meet their abductee projects for impromptu abduction dates and ask questions. That is, the hybrids are asking questions of the abductees about things that they see the humans doing. Sometimes the hybrids take the abductees to abandoned military bases or unused parts of active installations. And then the reviewer asks, in parentheses, why would they do that? Question mark. Well, in a way, when I read that, I thought that was revelatory. Short though it may be, it perfectly, in my opinion, clarifies the fact that, quite to the contrary of what he's ever said about this, he does have cases of this. And apparently it's frequent enough so that the reviewer noticed them prominently in the book and decided to mention them on 2 occasions in the review. So that suggests that it's, I mean, one would be enough, but apparently there's many more. And of course, overall, statistically, you would tend to find at least more than one if you had hundreds of cases like Jacobs has had. So in my opinion, that helps clarify this distinction so that we don't mislead ourselves in thinking that Jacobs' research and clientele is unique among all abduction therapist clientele, because, when Melinda has talked with all the rest of them, they all admit that they have cases of this.
Yeah, he's definitely dogmatic in his views. I can't argue with that.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to talk to him about it. Last time I met him in Laughlin, him and Bud was more than willing to entertain the ideas of some of the stuff I was talking with him about. But David seemed to be very, very... Oh. Sorry about that, guys. That's what you call flipping the phone. Can you hear me okay, Randy?
Yeah, what happened?
That was me playing flip the phone out of my hand. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh.
I didn't mean to knock y'all's ears out.
You dropped the phone.
Yeah, oh yeah, man. I was fiddling with something I shouldn't have been. But get back to what we were talking about. He does seem to be very dogmatic in his views, and he doesn't want to change. It's kind of like, he doesn't want to admit to the MILAB thing. He doesn't want to admit to the government involvement at all, really. And then he only has one agenda, which is they're here to take us over and kill us and all kind of other wonderful stuff. And which some of that may be true. It's just a lot of it's not. And I don't understand how he can make some of the basic fundamental mistakes he's made in some of what he's written if he's got more than like 5 cases. It's hard for me to understand it. In Bud's case, I see him do stuff together, but then I see Bud do stuff on the side, and Bud seems to be moving down a different road. He seems to be looking at other possibilities and other explanations for what's going on, and that's what you would really want to see in all of this. But like I said, David's just kind of dogmatic, and I have no idea why. But maybe that's been the way he's always been. Maybe that's the conclusions he came to, and he figures that they're right and there is no change in it. I just don't know how he does that. I learned a long time ago, and you may be right today and wrong tomorrow in this field.
Yeah, that's true, but it could be a function of his position.
Yeah.
Because that is in fact unique. He does have a career in a rather mainstream area of higher education, and so it could be that he just doesn't, want to add problems to an already problematic situation. He's really the only person. In fact, I was mentioning that to someone not long ago about how he has been able to succeed in keeping the career, whereas when Dr. Mack entered abduction, they very judiciously attempted to force Dr. Mack out of his tenured position at Harvard University. He actually had to resort to legal defense to protect it and preserve it, because they definitely wanted him out of there soon.
Yeah, because he believed in UFOs and alien abduction. You know that. Yeah. It's a little better today, but I mean, even there's been some other people who recently have been pushed out of professors' jobs and stuff like that, dealing, or have been, why don't you leave if you want to get your pension kind of deal. And I can't remember, but I thought Richard Dolan told me he used to teach at the American College. I'd have to go look now, but I know he's not anymore. I know he's a full-time ufologist now, I guess would be the best, or a full-time historian might be a better way of saying it. I haven't seen his new book yet either. I'm dying to see it. I haven't heard anything about it, which is, I find, just really, really weird.
Yeah,
but I'm waiting to hear. And I do know that he made some mentions about alien abduction and military abduction in the book. He told me that the last time I interviewed him about 8 months ago. And I was kind of curious to see what it is, but I'll wait till I can get my hands on a copy of it and read it, and go through it and all of that wonderful stuff.
Well, he is one of the few more prominent figures that has overtly or publicly commended the work that Melinda and I are doing in our book, which just full circle back to that question because we went off on too many tangents. My book is still available. In fact, if there's anybody who has a computer while they're listening to this, in the sense that they can do two things at once, and log on to my website, it's AN like a Nancy w.com/RK/CAMO, and then they can see excerpts of the book and color photographs from the book. And it might actually be the case that if they link from there over to the Amazon site where it's for sale, there is a section on the Amazon site, where people can post their opinions, their little mini reviews of books. And I will, on the air here, thank Richard Dolan from my heart, because he told me that he was going to actually post a formal book review and commendation for a book on there. I haven't actually gone to the trouble to look it up since he said that he would. But in any case, I will quote him at one point in it, because it was actually rather long, and I was really impressed because of all the people that Melinda and I gave the book to in hopes of receiving feedback, he actually, maybe ironically, maybe not, was the only one who really followed through and basically responded. So, in my opinion, that's a commendation for his objectivity.
Yeah.
And his objectivity has also been reflected in the sense that he knows that if ever, in any of these kind of like public debates as to the validity of ending what is perceived as the cover-up, it can't be debated or can't be discussed without including abduction research. You can't sweep that under the rug simply because it's the most controversial area. And since Melinda and I have tried to articulate or place abduction within the framework of many other things that have occurred throughout ufology since the beginning, then Dolan actually said in the review that in the book I address issues that other researchers avoid, and I thought that was the greatest thing that anybody could say, because intentionally I'm trying to create progress, in ufology by in fact doing exactly that, by addressing issues that most researchers don't want to basically bring into their kind of like assessment of this situation. And in my opinion, at this point in time, after 3 generations of ufology being done since World War II, it's about time that ufology should be, in my opinion, reevaluated entirely, and especially from the point of view where the nexus between abductions versus the human intervention and the experiences of abductees is basically addressed, kind of like front stage center.
Yeah, I can understand that. Oh, what was that just swinging by there? Well, guys, I think you got to get the book too, because I'm telling you, you're going to enjoy it if you get it. And actually, Richard and I had talked when where was I? I think it was in Roswell. We were actually talking about your book. It came up in a conversation. I think.
Oh, really?
At breakfast, actually. Yeah. Well, I got to tell y'all too, ladies and gentlemen, if you're traveling and you're out in the conferences, you want to try to stay in the hotel where the conference is being held. Now, I know a lot of these guys, so it's easier for me to talk to them, but they are approachable, and stuff like breakfast and lunch, sometimes you can you can ask them a question, but don't be rude, because they are trying to eat and go do whatever they're doing for the day. But that's some of the best conversations that happen. Is either at the bar or over dinner or over breakfast or something, or sitting at the tables while you're at the conference. I mean, it just seems it's where a lot of the better conversations are. I mean, you're getting information at the lectures, don't get me wrong, but there seems to be a whole wealth more outside of these lectures, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now, I know our friend's going to be in Laughlin too, she told me.
Yeah.
With
you mean Melinda?
Yeah,
and
Melinda.
Niara.
Niara. I don't know why. Niara's going to smack me. I knew who it was too, yeah, because they're going to be doing this kind of topic joint together now. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Maybe I'll try to get out there this February for a Laughlin and check it out.
Yeah, there was some doing to actually get them to, persuade the board of examiners there to to actually address the issue, but they did. So we can be proud of that.
Yeah, well, it's something they've been needing to bring up for a while, and it would be nice if, like, Ryan Wood would have invited somebody over there. I mean, there's at least 4 of us now that can handle ourselves on this topic, or really, 4, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
3, 4. I better say 5 because I there's some contactees/MILABS out there. I don't want to upset.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, because I've been working on a new article myself for it, and well, I had talked with Leah Haley just recently, and I gotten her to refresh my mind about what had happened with her down in Florida and other stuff like that. I got that in there. And of course, I talk to Melinda on a fairly regular basis, and I talk with Kay Wilson on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
And I just been kind of mushing it on my head. I spent several weeks going through Carla Turner's stuff, and just going. Matter of fact, I played a lot of it on the radio station, so I could do it. And then I'll probably, before I write the article, I'll probably reread your book. That way I can take all of this information and mush it into my head and then mush it out and actually into an article, not a book. But because I've been wanting to do it for a while, I just never seem to have the time. But now I've kind of got all the pieces in the right places, so I'll actually get it done and get it out there, and everybody can get an idea what I personally think about all this and what the organization thinks about it and what our friends and fellow researchers think about it. It should be interesting, to say the least. Oh, speaking of that, I'm glad that came up. Ladies and gentlemen, a good friend of mine is looking for a webmaster. If you know me and you're a decent webmaster, get in touch with me. I meant to call her, too. Elaine Douglas, who heads up JAR, gave me dropped me a letter the other day, and I meant to call her and tell her I'd see if I could find somebody for her to help her out with it, because she does a lot of good work over there. She does a lot of abduction stuff. And while I'm on this, I got to tell my wife happy birthday so she don't smack me. Yes, she made 30 this year. And
happy birthday.
Yeah, I had to tell her happy birthday because I don't want to get hurt or nothing like that. She's looking like she's going to smack me as it is. But it is kind of subtle. I mean, not subtle. There does seem to be a finite what ufology will put up with when it comes to military abductions, I should say. Because I know early on, I stumbled across Melinda by accident. Both of y'all by accident. I stumbled across Melinda by accident. Of course, by meeting Melinda, I met you. And and really, I mean, I was only kind of partially looking at this military thing. I mean, I knew there was military involvement, but I was so tied up in the alien abduction thing. I kind of, was just. And then after talking to her, and then I think the second interview I did was with both y'all, it became a passion of mine and several members of the organization. And since then, it's made strides. And then we've all gotten together, the 3 of us and a couple others have gotten together, and everybody's gotten on coast a few times. And it seems like we've breathed new life into this topic finally. And Randy, I think it might actually stay this time.
New life into
military abductions, because they had really seen, because Melinda had brought it out, a decade ago. Actually, I think it was longer than that. I hate to even say that, but she had brought it out a while back and had really presented it well, and then it was just kind of pushed away for a while.
Well, that's understandable because, I mean, in terms of, commending the abduction researchers or therapists and giving them credit where credit is due, for a long time, going back to when that originally started to become an issue within ufology, that is abduction research specifically, it was all well and good to focus and specialize, as you've described it in the past, in that area, and leave other considerations to be addressed later, since simultaneously any evidence for the human intervention portion would have been minimal at best, 15 or 20 years ago. And so for a long time, I think it was probably preferable to focus on the ET/abduction data, just so we can clarify whether or not it was plausible that there are ETs abducting humans. And I've been recently, early what I had been doing off the air, and one of the things I've been doing is I have a tremendous collection of taped programs of various types off the television, network television, commercial television, beginning in the early 90s through, in fact, most of them that I have are specifically within the mid 90s. And this could be any number of different talk shows that are just straight ahead talk shows, human interest talk shows, not necessarily programs like Sightings or Encounters or that type of program that addressed occasionally the abduction phenomena. But overall, wherever it would appear as specials, sometimes, 1 or 2 hour specials and news programs, it was addressed formally as part of regular news broadcasts on network television any number of times. And as I've been perusing all these and observing how it was treated going back at least, 12 to 15 years ago, well, I'm here to tell you that, in a way, the overall impression that you get, the way it was addressed, was actually much more professional and much more unbiased than you have been led to believe by people who criticize the mainstream media as perpetrating a blackout on UFO issues generally for decades. Yeah. It actually contradicts that substantially because they dealt with the abduction, which is the most controversial, on much more fair-minded basis than actually it has been credited to. Now, of course, more often than not, they did have someone that would come on, especially on the talk shows. They'd bring on a skeptic, and that always was disconcerting to people like Bud Hawkins. More often than not, it was him or Dr. Mack that were the quote-unquote experts. But that's all acceptable too, because of the fact that during that time period, going back 15 years, in the sense of that was the formal period when they were publicizing this, well, it was actually necessary to have skepticism, because even they themselves were not absolutely sure 100% as to a fair interpretation of every aspect of the abduction process that they were learning about. And of course, a number of the more crucial data points that they thought were definitive to the experience, they never publicized, because that was their ace in the hole to discern the people who were mistaken versus the people who had the real experience. And so the skeptics never learned those things, and the public at large never learned them. And in fact, there's still, to a degree, I'm sure you would agree, that there are still things that really have never been publicized about the abduction phenomena, simply because the researchers need to have some index for qualifying the people who are false positives versus the real abductees.
Very good point too.
Yeah, so that the people who are skeptical about this really do not have the total picture by simply reading books.
And it's funny you brought that up, because a young man from France wrote me a letter the other day, a young man in his 30s, and just completely griped me out about how come we don't share more information. And I kind of got a little aggravated with it, and I'm thinking to myself, and then I finally wrote to him, I said, you know what, we share entirely too much information, because recently it's been brought to my attention by a couple of my directors and even some friends of mine that are kind of half-heartedly in the field, that it is getting really hard to tell the difference between a genuine contactee and one who's not. And that is partly our fault, because we've been putting out quite a bit of the abduction criteria over the last 2 years.
Right.
And even quite a bit of the military abduction criteria. And I'm personally to the point now where I don't think we're going to be releasing much more in those areas, but it does make it hard. And we do need to be able to determine who's telling us the truth and who's not. And to the person who just instant messaged me, how do we know the truth or not? That's why we call it criteria. All of us have been in this field for quite some time. It's not like we just started doing this yesterday. Personally, I've been in it 26 years. And the thing about it is, in 26 years, you learn a lot of things. And the amount of cases that we've accumulated over the years, it's funny. I was talking with Melinda about this not too long ago. If we took just our internet cases alone, we're not even going to talk about anything else we do. If we took just our internet cases alone, you could combine every major abduction researcher in the field, and they still would not have as many cases as we do. And that's if you combined all their cases. And that's just on the internet cases. You start getting into reported cases we've been working on, prior cases when we were back with MUFON, that number grows immensely. And but it is one of the reasons we have a little bit easier time than everybody else, and who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth. And recently, our Oregon State Director, which I'm glad I thought about this, November Hansen, has come up with a new grade questionnaire. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been abducted by graves, experienced anything with them. You can find the questionnaire on my Facebook page, on the Paranormal Radio Network page at the top left corner, on the UFO Undercover page, and on the iCar front page, and on the iCar nav bar. It's real easy to find. It's about 77 questions, if I remember correctly. I think our Bill sent us 3 or 4 more questions, which is another one of our state directors. But it's there for y'all. There's another report that a friend of mine sent me that's 1,500 pages long. We're not going to post the 1,500 pages, but we will be posting, which is about 200 or 300 pages, the results of the 1,500-page study on the human aliens. So some of that will be going on the site as well. So the next thing after this is finished will be another study on the reptilian. So this will be basically the 3rd time we've done this. We'll take all the new data combined it with everything else. And meanwhile, while we're doing this, and see, everybody's like, wait, they're forgetting about the military guys. See, we're not. See, while we're doing this, we're looking for military abductees. While we're talking to people, we're finding out, was this person a military abductee? Did they have anything? Do they remember anything? Did they have low-grade harassment or anything along those lines? Which we're going to get into some of that in a little while, too. But it's important for people to understand how this all works, what we do, why we're involved. Dan from Seattle just writes into us and wants to know, this is for both of us. He wants to know why both of us are in this field. Well, we'll let Randy answer that first. Why are you in the field, Randy? What possessed you to ever get involved with this?
With
ufology,
specifically this subcategory.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Is that true, guys? You want to know why we got in ufology, or why we're involved with military abductions? Clarify. Hold on. Let's see. Oh, all right. They are clarifying why we got involved with military abduction.
Oh, well, I've tried to explain that in the past.
It's a hard one.
And actually, it's pretty simple. It's because the abduction. And frankly, I'm going to try and edit myself to, and preferably use the phrase, although it's longer. MILAB, or as Melinda likes to call it, rehab, as in reabduction, is simpler because it's an acronym. But frankly, to lessen the ambiguity which does occur once you get in deeper into the biographical sketches of these of the MILAB characteristics. Well, I think it's better to use human intervention, and the term human is operative in my answering this question because the problem with abductions, and the human intervention is a subset of abduction research overall. Problem with the abduction research is that you can't interrogate or query the ETs directly about the evidence for the abduction phenomena. All you have to go on are the people who have been, the experiencers, as they call them. Whereas in this other area, we have a phenomena that basically is being initiated by human beings. They very substantially appear to have had a lot of military training, and in fact, some of the human intervention cases claim that they have been taken to military bases. But there are categories. Actually, the human intervention phenomena per se has a number of different categories. Not all of them have been kidnapped and taken to military bases. Some of it is just varying degrees of harassment or surveillance. Okay, so that has to be considered. And the reason why I got involved in this is specifically because it was an area that involved humans, and humans can be understood more clearly than whatever the alien agenda is. And so I thought if there was ever a fertile area for us to go in, it would be into an area involving human beings that basically leads us back to what's been being done by the ETs. And so it's basically an issue of logic, right? The logic is that, as Melinda likes to say, or in fact, I was going to read a passage from a new article that I wrote, and it just says, our thesis is that human reabducted or ET abduction cases are a most fertile area for recognizing where all these various other ufological categories of research converge, because they do. All the other areas of research converge in this type of experience. because one of the criteria, it seems, for those MILAB cases who have been interrogated specifically is the interest on the part of the interrogators into the area of a technological line of thinking and a line of questioning that would logically lead back to the whole seemingly nuts and bolts and separate issue of the craft saucer phenomena. But really, when you look deeper, you find that all this stuff weaves together in a very logical and sensible whole. And therefore, what I've realized ultimately with our investigations into this area is that the byproduct of it has been that Melinda and I and any of you know of the other people who are involved in it are actually contributing towards developing a hypothesis that helps explain how all these other areas of research work together. So that's the answer.
Well, y'all got that? Yeah, I already said what I was doing it earlier, so I'm not explaining. That's as far as I'm going. As far as why I got in the field, that's too long. We don't have enough time for that. So we're not going to even go there.
Well, yeah, but what I was trying to say to the guy was that you're in a nutshell, all these things can be seen to work together, and so I thought it was remarkable that we found, kind of like by default, an area of research that led in that direction. Of course, we didn't know that in the beginning, but no. Another way to put it would be that this area is leading to real progress in ufology, not just simply gathering more data points in any given area of research that adds more specifics to whatever area it is, but overall, you just have a more clarified understanding of whatever area it is. But the real issue now, after, like I said before, after 3 generations of ufological pursuits by all the various people, you know, that have done this, you know, come and gone, you know, because many of the prominent people have died from the earlier days. Well, where does this all come together? Where do we understand this on a level, at least on a par, with whatever it is that the authorities seem to know, that they aren't being very overt about it? And actually, I think that it is possible to understand this on a much higher level with much more coherency than many ufologists give us credit for doing. And that would be one of the reasons why they keep on advocating that there is something to disclose by the people in authorities that has never happened, and so therefore they should, so then we can understand what we don't know. I think the truth is that we know much more, or we could know much more than we think we do, and since there's no evidence that there is going to be any official disclosure, well, we have to go with what we have to go with. So,
you know, I'm glad you brought up the official disclosure thing too, but I hate touching this because this is a can of worms, but the reason I'm glad you brought it up is recently I got a couple emails about that. Actually, earlier today I was reading, and a couple of my rather new agey friends wrote to me and told me they'll be disclosing this year.
Yeah, there's a rumor.
Yeah, there's a rumor, that. Right? And you know, I try to be nice to them because there's a lot of them friends of mine, and I don't want to discourage anybody from getting in the field. But guys, I'm going to say this, and Randy's here; he can tell you what he thinks about it. First off, I don't see any reason for the U.S. government to disclose. Secondly, as far as I can see, the aliens have disclosed to everybody they want to disclose too. So yeah, I just don't see why at this point anybody would want to disclose anything. I mean, for the U.S. government, let me put it another way, and since we're talking about military abduction, this is one of the reasons why they abduct contactees, is because the military is looking for answers. A lot of times they're looking for, and it's one of the reasons Melinda Leslie coined the term re-abductee, because technically that's what they really are. Now, their abductees have been re-abducted by the government and for the hopes of obtaining information for technologies, the way technologies work, agendas, things along those lines. Yes, the government does have some of this technology. However they got it, I don't know. But they don't really seem to know how to work it too well. They don't know how to really backwards engineer it. And I hate to say this, because this probably worries our listeners, but they really don't know much more about the alien agendas than we do. And in some cases, I don't think they know as much as some of the more prominent researchers, or maybe not prominent, but some of the researchers that have been in the field for a long time and have a lot of cases. And I do think it's one of the reasons, like right now, we have an open line while Randy and I are talking. It's one-stop shopping, That's how I think of it. And but they do like to listen, and they are learning, and they are taking contactees. And in some cases, I think they may even be trying. And I don't know if we caused this, or maybe we learned this from them, because we do a lot of program of contactees and send them in to ask questions. So recently, it's been brought to my attention in the last few years that it seems to be that the government has programs along these lines that they're not really successful all that much, but they do try to reprogram contactees to obtain more information from the extraterrestrials. It just seems like ET's a tad bit smarter than the average government agent is. But, you know, at least maybe we should be grateful for that, huh, Randy? Did you ever see the STS-41, STS-48 video when they took a pot shot at the UFO? All I can think is when I seen this video, I'm thinking, well, I am so grateful that ET was laughing at the time, because you see this thing cruising across the sky. Here's the shuttle. Here's this little thing cruising across the sky. All of a sudden, you see this. It looks like a bolt of light coming up from the surface of the planet. It's cruising. I mean, it's cruising. And this thing's still moving towards it. All of a sudden, it stops, and then it just darts out in the other direction. Now, the light didn't even get closer. And the video is available, guys. It's still on the internet today. It's one of the few videos that came out after before the 7-second delay was put in effect. Matter of fact, from what I was told, this video is the reason why the 7-second delay was put in effect. Because now they want to be able to edit the video before, because a lot of us in the old days used to record all the different things in space, the spacewalks and the different repairs on stuff. And like when Jeff Challenger, or whatever his name is, you hear him, they're working on the Hubble telescope, him and the lady, I can't remember her name. And she's like, what's that? And you hear him, he says, let me turn around. And when he turns around, you hear him say, oh, shit. And then that's it. You don't hear anything else. There's no more video. There's no more nothing. And apparently something was right up on him. You could hear it in his voice. I mean, he was shaking. You could hear it in his voice. That is still available on the internet. You can still find it on the internet. I'd probably try YouTube for that, but it's still available as well. And these are things that, along with satellite photos of ETs, that you got to kind of really take serious. I mean, this is serious evidence. There's no real way to fake this kind of stuff. I mean, we're talking several miles up into space, guys. Unless you have a spaceship, I don't think you can really hoax this stuff. But it's important because, it shows a military progress, a military presence in this, and the military is moving towards a direct. They have a direction or their own agenda, is what I should say. And maybe military. I was talking with Melinda about this a while back, and I am kind of glad we went to the rehab thing, because military might not actually be the correct word, because it's not Obama's military doing this. It's not the military that's protecting and serving us in Afghanistan and Iraq. These aren't the guys involved with this. This is some covert group that may have been recruited from the military, but who they work for and what they actually are today is anybody's best guess.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I just want to confirm that that's why I'm saying that I just want to go back to a longer phrase for it, but nonetheless it's more generic, because you can't actually be sure. Yeah, it is, and you're right, it is. I mean, and I got to say this too. We use MILAB and rehab, but military abduction hits home a lot harder. Because people, I say the word MILAB and rehab, and they just kind of look at me. I say, oh well, no, they're a military abductee. Then they're like, whoa, wait, what the hell is he talking about? And it just seems to hit home harder. But well, yeah, I know, but that's just because people are impressed about the conspiratorial implications. Yeah, well, that the military is up to no good. But actually, it doesn't make any sense. It makes sense that at some level there are, military intelligence people who are monitoring whatever is going on in a procedural sense. And there could very well be scientists that are assigned to, civilian scientists or military scientists or military doctors that are assigned to certain projects through their recruitment into the military per se, but they ended up in these projects, and in some way they may be military, in the technical sense, but once we evaluate the significance of the evidence through the interrogation phase of these experiences, that leads into technology and how that could relate to the understanding of alien technology in terms of crash retrievals and all that. Well, then basically that leads us to the area where it's really more definitive in trying to understand who's really up to this, because the reverse engineering of technology would not be being done by the military in any way. It's done by the contractor.
Yeah, by the private contractors. It's always been done that way.
Yeah, and the contractors are, and there's evidence for this.
Well, all you got to look at was that Russian MiG. I think it was in the 70s. No, it was the early 80s when we got the hands of that Russian MiG. First thing they did with it was sent it. I think it was either Lockheed or Boeing, but one of them got it instantly. That's who got it, and that's who did all the work on it. And we're going to always do it that way because, frankly, the civilian, they're set up for it. They're geared for it. They have the right scientists in place. They've already got the infrastructure in place to handle something like this. The military really doesn't. The military has the resources to go out and get stuff and bring it to them, but they're not really set up to really do the hardcore research. Now, that may be changing now that both the Air Force and the Navy have their own space programs. We might be seeing a fundamental change here, but I think it's going to be a slow change. I don't think it's going to be a really fast change. I think this is going to be something that, eventually they may take full control over. But
yeah, but the technology is still made by the manufacturers.
Yeah, it's still
that's my point. And so they have to understand how any of this information figures into what they've discerned through the research in terms of their evaluation of research that was done independently, also by humans, such as the research. On my last appearance here, I went through in great detail about the nexus of research in the paranormal versus the rudimentary discoveries made in what's called electrogravitic or levitation technology by T. Townsend Brown. And there have been other researchers in that area, so I presume that just like the contractors and the military intelligence who work with the contractors would be interested in any first-hand experience and little insights into the operation of ET technology could be gained through interrogating abductees who claim to have had experience with such technology, that they would also have apprised the developments in similar, though more rudimentary types of principles in electrogravitics, and applied that and pieced all that together to become or to figure prominently in whatever equation they're trying to develop in terms of our own levitation craft. And of course, we know by virtue of the photographic evidence that has surfaced back in the early 90s, when it was possible to do it, to photograph the experiments in the vicinity of the S4 site nearby Area 51, that definitely they have levitation craft that operate very, very, in some ways identical to, the proverbial sighting ET craft type of characteristics.
No, the T3 seem like they do. The TR3B seem like they run pretty much a lot like what we hear about our ETs. But we got to take a break right quick, Randy, so hang with me for a few minutes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go take a quick break. We'll be back in about 8 or 10 minutes. I'm Joe Montalvo, your host of UFO Undercover. I'm sitting and speaking with Randy KOPPANG. We're going to get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of rehab and military abductions when we return from the break, so please stay tuned.
When an alien lit right there on the ground, commenced to throwing his weight around. Now, old Six Gun didn't take too kindly to that kind of thing, especially without Vaseline or anything, seriously. Well, Six Gun looked that critter right in the eye and said, "Any last wish before you die?" Yo, reached for his gun, quick as a twitch, and said, "Fill your claw, you son of a bitch." Now a legend spread across the land about this pistol-waving man. But if you're from space or from Earth below, you don't give no lip to Six Gun Joe.
Welcome to UFO Undercover with your host, Joe Montalvo.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the first hour of the show. Randy and I have barely touched on anything, and we'll get a little bit more in depth as the show progresses through. For my friend who requested Kevin Smith after the show tonight, I will play Kevin Smith for y'all in its entirety, or from it's live, so I'll just pick it up live when Randy and I are through. So don't hate it on us if we've gone over a little bit. I don't get to talk to Randy that often, once a year maybe, and unless I happen to bump into him somewhere, which I still haven't managed to do that yet, Randy.
Not yet. I
Sooner,
don't get around much to the UFO conferences.
where are you now? What state are you in?
Los Angeles, California.
Oh, you out on the West Coast. Oh, he's a West Coaster, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
We know about y'all West Coasters.
Yep.
Not just giving y'all a hard time. See, we need to do like a MILAB conference out there. Maybe just a little one, like a Saturday or a Sunday. Melinda's not far. I mean, and I know a few other people that Cali's actually a good place for it.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I can catch a bus or something, thumb out there or something.
Yeah.
Hitchhike. I don't know,
You're right.
no airplanes and nothing. I love to fly, but I don't know. I've been hearing some bad stuff about the airline industry lately. I might stay off and we just got through flying not too long ago, but I think I might stay off the airlines for a while. I've been hearing some really, really bad stuff.
No.
Well, actually, they did a special on it just recently, scared the daylights out of me. And I just was recently flying to Washington, D.C., where they were talking about how bad it was.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's what I want to hear. That's our country for you, ladies and gentlemen. We've got issues. We're working on them.
You're right. They're limited to
Well,
slacking off.
Truth might be the first issue we need to work on, how to tell the truth. Guys, Randy and I were talking at the break. It's a shame the audience never gets to hear the break. There's a lot of stuff we talk about that we don't get back. But the thing of the matter is we were talking about why there's not going to be disclosure. And, we've got friends in the field that we both know, and we were talking about particular individuals. I'm not going to bring their names up, but we were discussing why we keep telling these people there's not going to be disclosure. While I'm talking about that, ladies and gentlemen, let's use the virtual auditorium, or you can write into me. Look, my MySpace page is open. My Facebook page is open. I'm not messing with the 800 numbers, but you can write to me in either one of those. You can pop into the virtual auditorium, put your question up there, but quick poll, quick survey. We'll use the virtual auditorium, quick survey. 1, if you think there'll be disclosure in the next 10 years. 2, if you think there's not going to be disclosure wait, let's do this again. 1, if you think there's going to be disclosure in the next, 10 years. 2, if you think there's going to be disclosure in the next 50 years. And 3, if there'll ever be disclosure of this particular topic matter. B, unless, ET, 1. Y'all really think there's going to be disclosure in the next 10 years? Y'all are on crack, is all I can say. I got an audience full of crackheads tonight.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'll get some emails over that one. Guys, come on. Look, Randy, we're going to have to explain to these people why there's not going to be disclosure.
Well, I was prepared for that.
Yeah, so we're gonna come back. I'm gonna let Randy explain to y'all why we think this, because we both discussed this and we're pretty close on this. You want to tell them, Randy, because I think they need a lesson in disclosure here.
Well, I think they should, to balance off the very more prominent official disclosure advocates that are out there who have saturated the media, if you want to call it that. And in some cases, it is legitimate mainstream media. In the case of George Norrie's show, a lot of those people appear on periodically. And George is always asking, when it is, because he's looking so much forward to it. Yes.
George, I got to give him credit on this while we're on this, because I thought the first time I ever brought this up with George, he was going to kind of back away, but he didn't. And then when me and Melinda were on there, he was right into it. And when Melinda was there, he was into it. He's this must be one of the topics that he's, you can tell he's got a passion for.
Well, yeah, that's a sign of I credit him for being objective and considering things that he didn't consider, and then being willing to reevaluate his opinion or any conclusions that he drew that leads to this, what I think is basically a faulty overall evaluation that leads to a false or kind of like it's creating hope where there isn't any reason to have hope for something once you basically apprise the working hypothesis that explains all the data, which we are providing. Once you are apprised of that, which you and Melinda presented to George, then he was willing to, you could hear it, he was reluctant, but he was beginning to see the point that maybe there's something else going on here that in one way or another would preclude the powers that be from disclosing anything at all about any of it, because, you can't be half pregnant. Either you're going to disclose something and you're going to go into the areas where you'd have to absolutely demonstrate, physically, a verification of what you're announcing to the satisfaction of rigorous scientific scrutiny, or either that, or you're not going to say anything about any of it. And since there is basically covert agendas going on, certainly that's what we're trying to say is going on with respect to the human intervention experience of abductees, or otherwise, surveilling the public, going on for years and years. Well, that's a violation of constitutional rights.
Oh, yeah.
And so, if for no other reason they're not going to disclose it, it's because the intelligence community, who has been ordered to gather information covertly about the UFO phenomena from civilians, and using protocols and methods to basically secure information, even if it means to violate their civil rights. Well, they have been doing that, and there's very substantial evidence for that. Now, I'm going to beg your Joe. I'm going to beg your patience here, because I'm going to do. Remember that guy who queried a few minutes ago, or about an hour ago, from France? He wanted more information.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read off. He was interested in more information about the abduction phenomena, but as we're trying to explain, the abduction phenomena is given more credibility by investigating the human intervention or MILAB phenomena. The two work together, and Melinda is inspired in this direction because she feels that this is one fertile area for lending credibility to abduction phenomena by investigating the human intervention phenomena. So what I'm going to do right here for the benefit of that guy or anybody else who wants to do real homework, and not expect to hear it all on the internet and spoon-fed them. Well, I'm going to read the titles of all the books, because I just wrote a new article, and if you're going to do your own writing and apprise yourself of recent developments, then you should read my new article, the title of which is "The Unofficial," not the official, the unofficial ET disclosure and its history of covert ufology. The way I define what they're doing with regards to the human intervention is just a different form of ufology. We're doing our ufology, they're doing their ufology. They may know more about it than we do overall, but in some areas apparently they don't, and that's why they're interrogating some of the abductees about it. Well, you can read about these types of human intervention circumstances by reading the following books. The first two of them, however, were both written by a researcher, because he himself, although he was not an abductee, namely Raymond Fowler actually in a couple of his books basically reveals the fact that he himself had to realize, to his chagrin, that they were tapping his phone and surveilling him also. But what was he doing? He was basically, in the beginning, he was just doing rigorous investigation into sightings, and then ultimately wrote 3 of the best abduction books, which were all about the same case, namely the Betty Andreasson case. But Betty Andreasson herself was basically a lower category human intervention or MILAB case. And they used to follow her around in the black helicopters and all that, and they had photographs of that. So the first 2 books on my list are, the first one is Case Book of a UFO Investigator, 1981, by Raymond Fowler, and then the Andreasson Affair Phase 2 from 1982 by Raymond Fowler. And then both of those articulate, in some cases I think there are a few photographs of the black helicopters, and basically those are the lower level types of MILAB or human intervention cases. The rest of these books are all written by abductees. And so in those books, they themselves independently volunteer the evidence for this vis-a-vis their own experience. The first one is the Lost Was the Key by Leah Haley in 93. Next is Alien Jigsaw in 93 by Katharina Wilson. Next is Taken in 1994 by Carla Turner, Ph.D. The next one is Abducted, 94 by Debbie Jordan and Kathy Mitchell. The next one is Breakthrough, 95 by Willie Strieber. The The next one is the Exiles, that's spelled Excyles, 95 by Mia Adams. Next one is Beyond My Wildest Dreams, 95 by Kim Carlsberg. The next one is Connections, 95 by Anna Jamerson and Beth Collings. Then Project Open Mind, 96 by Katharina Wilson. Next, Diary of an Abduction, 2001 by Angela Thompson-Smith, PhD. The next is The Keepers, 2006 by Jim Sparks. Next, Walking Between Worlds, 2007 by Ann Andrews. And the last is Abducted by Aliens, 2008 by Chuck Weiss. Altogether, there's 15 books there. So anybody wants to do their homework and find out how this has been documented for over the years, and then you can wonder why it's only a few of us that are talking about it. And there were a lot of abduction researchers involved in all those cases that know perfectly well that this is going on. So what we're trying to do here, vis-a-vis the claim that there's going to be an official disclosure, is saying that when you evaluate the implications of both the fact that this is occurring and also the implications of what this is all about, it would absolutely preclude anybody in authority ever admitting anything about any of it, because they would be opening a can of worms that they'd never be able to control. Because an official disclosure would be, a disclosure to not simply, a handful of Americans who want to hear it. An official disclosure would be a major world event to 6.7 billion people. And I highly recommend that people who are, concerned about whether or not there will or won't be an official disclosure, think of it in those terms, and then you will rapidly be able to see that perhaps this has been thought through and there's something else going on than simply trying to hide ETs, which apparently, decide to disclose themselves whenever they choose.
I know. It's, I don't know. Well, we're going to move along. I got to get some questions in here, right?
Okay, get some questions.
Because before we start getting hate mail here. Actually, Laurel actually sent this question in early this morning off of Facebook. And I had read it earlier, but I really wanted to read it again. It says, Colonel Phil Corso had a theory that some of the Greys are created clone cyborgs type thing to travel and survive long distances in outer space. And then she goes on to say that the creators added artificial body parts, genetically altered the clones, to kind of replicate to look like the ones that created them. And then what she's asking is, I wonder if their creators endowed these androids with artificial intelligence. Would Corso's theory fit into yours, the theory that these beings could be designed to have multiple brain nodes?
Oh, well, that phrase right there gives me the hint that perhaps they read my reference to SAME, because I referred to that. Well, independently of whatever Corso did or didn't say it about it, I don't recall him. I read his whole entire book, and I don't recall him presenting a lot of information about that theory. Perhaps he did. Maybe I just forgot. Although independently of anything that can be attributed to him in that regard, that's been a running theory for many years, that at least some of the Greys, the way they've been in fact described by abductees, suggest the possibility that they might be a very, very highly evolved biological robot. That's perfectly plausible, but how you prove that, I don't know. Know them and be able to, absolutely verify that. I think it's entirely possible that some of them might be. I don't think that you would necessarily have evidence for making blanket statements about them, because, as Joe has said and other people have discerned, there's any number of, the Greys apparently are just like humans. Humans, there's a lot of different types of humans, different races, and then different variables even within different races that have, varying degrees of different appearances of the same type. If you look at the Asians, for instance, there's a lot of different types of Asians that seem to all be Asians, but they have a lot of different variables in terms of the shapes of their eyes or whatever, that kind of thing, how high they are. I think that also applies, obviously, to the Greys. They're just like humans in that sense.
Yeah, they are.
So who knows? But given the fact that the technological development of ETs is obviously many orders of magnitude beyond us, and we do know that if you really follow the peer-reviewed literature in genetic engineering research and also artificial intelligence, the kind of like the convergence of artificial intelligence and then robotics and genetic engineering, you know darn well that humans seem to be moving in the direction of trying to come up with, some kind of robotic creation that in its highly evolved state could be seem to appear like some kind of being. And so since we're moving in that direction, it could very well be that, in fact, it could very well be that the reason why we are pursuing those things is because we've been implanted with ideas by the ETs. All those very lines. I don't know. That's a, wide open area for speculation.
Well, it is a wide open area. a lot of speculation.
Yeah.
A friend of ours writes in from Wisconsin, Bill Burt. Oh, I don't know if you can get him to come to the room, Bill. You might get lucky one day he'll come visit y'all. He's talking about the virtual auditorium on Pal Talk.
Okay.
And, oh yeah, there's a bunch of y'all in there. There's 50-some of y'all in there. Well, guys, y'all have a good old time. I'm getting some more questions on Facebook from our friends on Pal Talk. So if you got questions, you can instant message me. I might not catch them if you let them roll by in text format. This next question is from Stephanie from Atlanta. I thought it was my sister at first because my sister's name is Stephanie and she lives in Atlanta.
Stephanie from Atlanta. Okay, what?
It's not. She wants to know why the government would ever. She doesn't believe that She doesn't believe that the government would ever abduct its own citizens and perform procedures on them. She does believe that aliens are abducting people, mind you, and she wants to know what the evidence is for military abductions.
Well, I just read the title of 13 books by abductees that describes, in the words of all the authors of the last 13 titles were all written by the people with the experience themselves. So go out there and read those books, and then you'll see the evidence for what they claim happened to them. And that's the evidence for this. Now, by the way, since we were nitpicking on how to define this type of phenomena, we are not saying, no one is saying the government, even the government with a lowercase g, much like capital G. The government is not doing what we're describing. In fact, that's what we were trying to say. We were trying to say that basically it's probably misleading to say that we should, to use the acronym MILAB, because it's very plausible that the people who are doing the most extreme example of this overall category of phenomena, namely kidnapping people and interrogating them against their will, the people who are perpetrating that obviously have military training, but there is no absolute evidence they are actually in the military per se when they are doing this. Some of them may, some of them might not. It's more logical to deduce that given the fact that there's an interest in technology and the evidence that we've tried to present in our book about the relationship between that and the reverse engineering process of crash GT craft, that probably the people who are really behind this are the military industrial contractors who are really doing the reverse engineering. The government is not doing that. The government may have intelligence operatives who are overseeing the operations, but we're not saying the government is kidnapping anybody.
Yeah, and it's a point I try to get across, and I know everybody who's doing this tries to get this point across, that we don't think this is Barack Obama's government doing this. And when I used to say George Bush's government, but now it's Barack's. But still, we don't actually think that these are the guys that are behind this. This is a much darker road that we're talking about here that's probably been in effect since World War II, maybe even before that. I know Melinda and I both have started looking for military abduction and rehab cases for the back. One of the reasons I looked into the Betty and Barney Hill case. And she's actually got them. We had capped out at the Betty and Barney Hill case, but with the last conversation I had with Melinda, she had actually got a couple of cases past that. So I think we're back as far as the 50s, as far as actual physical cases go of military abduction. So we can go back that far for sure. I really would want to say this group has probably been in effect. It either started right after World War I, or during World War II with the advent of the Foo Fighters, it's hard to say because we know the Germans were building flying saucers from 1913 and 1917 because we recovered some of the prototypes. Matter of fact, that's what some people think Roswell was, one of the recovered prototypes. But so we know this is real. It's not even classified anymore. So I mean, we know those are real. So it's kind of iffy when they actually started doing it. So when the government actually became fully functionally aware of alien abductions. But in all fairness, if the Secret Service did even half as good a job as it does today, it probably knew since probably George Washington, or maybe shortly after, because sooner or later you're going to start hearing these reports, and sooner or later someone in an organization is going to get abducted, and then of course it's happening. But there's no way to put a number on when it actually started happening. Frankie from the UK wrote in and wants to know. Okay, let me make sure I'm reading this right. Wants to know if we know of any military abductions in her city. She said in her country, and she's in London right now. Annie in London. Personally, I have heard of military abductions. She's talking about two she's heard about over there herself. Randy, you've heard some over there?
In England? Well,
yeah.
The only one that I know of, a classic one, I mean by name, and I'm sure they have heard about this, at least the case in the generic sense, which is the Bentwaters case, and one of the witnesses, namely Larry Warren, who actually I think still does live in England.
Yeah, he's still there.
He's lived there for many years. He had this type of experience in the overall unfolding of that kind of like incident per se over a number of days, and in his book, or his CD-ROM, I guess, or whatever, or the book that was written by his other friend who wrote a second book.
What is his name? Peter Robbins.
Yeah. They go into his experience. I have, in a generic sense, heard of some others, but I can't cite anything specific. Only a generic reference to it would be unlikely that there would not be. But let me go on to two other countries, because earlier this year, actually it was in June, Melinda had a long conversation with a very prominent UFO researcher from Italy, namely a man named Maurizio Beata. And Maurizio is a professional in the publishing world, and he was actually the managing editor of a UFO magazine in Italy. And Melinda was talking with him about evidence for the human intervention, or the MILAB cases in Europe, shall we say. And he claimed that he knew, he surprised Melinda because he knew so much about it, that people had written articles for his magazine about it. And he said that an interesting thing about it happening in Europe is that more often than not, the officials, you might say, or the authorities involved in it are actually from the French military.
Yep, we actually had quite a good conversation, about a 2.5, 3-hour conversation about that just recently.
Yeah, and that he said that they had evidence of it quite substantial occurring in both Italy and France, but he didn't mention in England. But he did say that it was an issue of discussion amongst European researchers. So, but there again, he also qualified even that, though. He said that there is evidence that it's possible that the Americans are involved in whatever is happening in France or Italy. He said he had evidence for that too. So that maybe the Americans are expanding their parameters for gathering information in this regard. And I think Joe is correct in deducing from that one of the motives for, kind of like broadening their database, if you want to look at it like that, that the experiences who have these experiences are kind of like individuals that comprise a database of human intelligence. There's a phrase, human, in the intelligence world, and vernacular of the intelligence world. There's a type of intelligence that's basically intelligence that comes from human beings, as opposed to electronic or satellite or whatever. And basically, the way I looked at it, because I started referring to this in my articles, that the abductees that are having these experiences are basically examples of human, H-U-M-I-N-T. They're cases of human intelligence. And that's one of the reasons why it's plausible that this is happening, because in a generic sense, one of the sources for intelligence data comes from humans. And so it's very clear that basically this is a type of intelligence gathering, information gathering operation. And therefore plausible that it would occur to them to do this.
And it is. That's what it is. It's you know, I find it interesting because I think we have cases in 10 or 12 countries now. But the thing is that they all have a common interest. They're either a very close American ally or one of the conquered nations or occupied nations like Korea, South Korea. I've actually heard of cases in Australia. We've got a couple of cases. And these, like I said, these are either, we got them in Japan too, and these are either very close allies or countries that we've occupied or countries where we keep a peacekeeping force. I've got a couple in Germany as well. And it seems to be in places, so far, it seems to be in places for us that the U.S. has a very, very strong military influence.
Yeah, right. NATO. It's called NATO.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does seem to be confined. I mean, I haven't heard any out of China or Russia yet. I do have a few people I know in Russia, and I have quite a few new friends in China, but, you know, we're establishing, and we don't really know who's who over there yet. And we are establishing friends over there because they're our third largest listening audience on the network now. So they have a big interest in this, and people are coming forward and talking to us, but it's slow. There's a lot of translations have to be done, and Google translators and other translators are not that proficient. They're good, don't get me wrong, but they don't get the finer words and stuff, and there's problems with that. But
true, that is a problem.
It is coming, and so I do know in those few NATO countries that basically that's what they are. That's a good point saying NATO, because that's basically what they are. So those countries we see this in, but I have heard of a couple of cases out of South America. What was it, 2 in Argentina, 1 in Venezuela. The one in Venezuela bothered me because, you know, come on, Venezuela's hostile, but then we don't know if that was actually a military abduction due to aliens or for some other reason. They did say there was Americans involved, though, and that really bothered me.
Oh, yeah.
You know, being our relationship we have with Venezuela right now, it just kind of threw me for a loop. But, you know, you just don't know if it's true. But the other countries seem to be pretty solid, and the cases seem to be pretty solid. And recently, in Europe, we started seeing cases on a fairly frequent basis now. Contactees, and this is something that's been bothering me. Contactees that I've talked to recently that had never had any military abduction experience, and I'm talking about overseas in Europe, all of a sudden, and for no real reason that we can see of, started having having military abductions. The only thing I can find in common with these guys and these ladies is they seem to be a little bit more advanced in their stage of alien contact. They seem to have a little better grip on it, a little better understanding of it. And it seems like they're deliberately targeting these people. Now, Melinda and I have talked about this a dozen times, and you can definitely tell me what you think, but people ask all the time, how does the government find the alien abductees?
That's a good question.
And it is. And it's a hard question, but there does seem to be some plausible explanations for it. I know anybody who may have gotten, what was that, the shot with the chicken smallpox shot, it leaves a sample in there, so if there's a radiation involved, and if you were in an environment where there's a different radiation, it would affect it. So you could have set up scanners for that. I'm sure they some of these families they already know about, and they do know aliens abducting family lines as well. So those family lines are probably watching from time to time to see if there's anybody that's going to develop out of them. Of course, the more famous contactees who get out on the airwaves like ourselves and start running our mouths, well, you can expect that they're going to come talk to you because you remember a lot of your contacts, so they definitely want to come talk to you. Kate Wilson and I brought that out about 5 years ago. Everybody was like, when I said it to her, actually I said it to Yvonne Smith first, and then I said to Kate, they were both like, oh shit. I'm not kidding you, that's just how they were. They were like, I never really thought of it like that. I'm like, yeah. I said, yeah. I said for the famous ones, they're even going to get twice as hard when you start talking about what you know and what you don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, people aren't thinking like investigators.
Yeah.
They're just thinking about, trying to reconcile this weird situation that is inexplainable, and that's very common amongst the generic abductee cases, because they, so many times you run into the abductee cases, and when you look in their biography, they're not interested in UFOs or anything.
Oh, no, they're not.
They're not. So
No.
they don't know anything about it. They don't watch programs, they don't read books, and they don't listen to George Norrie. They're just all of a sudden trying to find out why they have these memories.
And that's what it is. They'll start, we talk about this all the time. A lot of times they'll start manifesting in dreams, or daydreams for that matter, and you'll be like, and you can you'll sense that there's something not quite right, something's off. But a lot of times that may go on for a couple of years for some people before they actually face the fact that something is going on in their lives that they can't just close their eyes to and say it's not happening. Mm-hmm. But what bothers me, Randy, the most is how many don't ever recognize that this is going on. Ever. It's one of the things.
Yeah, that was especially 2 years ago with the older generation of people who just thought it was just kind of some weird natural phenomena that they kept to themselves, because it was kind of embarrassing to say, and with the old perception of the old, you might call it the old consensus reality of the 19th century, or that kind of thing, they just attribute it to kind of like your imagination is running away with you. Don't say anything, they'll think you're crazy. And that's a proverbial stereotype. Don't talk to anybody, don't tell anybody, they'll think you're crazy, right?
Yeah, and that's true too. It's it's like when I asked Kathleen Maldron about if anybody in her family had prior contact with UFOs, because I was trying to find a line on how they might have known the Hills had been abducted. And she said, no. And then I remembered hearing him in an interview, which I still have. I went and listened to the interview, and she's talking about how her sister, I think Kathleen's mom, had seen a UFO 5 or 6 years earlier and actually had inquired about it. So then I seen the progression. I'm like, well, wait. Even the government realizes that most people who have a sighting are probably contactees. 99% of sightings, we're pretty sure, happen to contactees, and it's usually when they're putting them back or picking them up. That's usually when they see a UFO. A lot of people will never, ever make the connection that that's what's happened to them, but that's usually what it is. Right. Because when we start digging into contactees' heads and abductees' heads, we find that they do see the craft a lot. And we find that early in their life that they had seen the craft but never put two and two together. And it's one of those things. It's just, I've seen somebody say about an assumption. No, it's not an assumption, because in the UFO community proves that I'm right for me. It's pretty easy, to be honest with you. 90% of all ufologists have never had a sighting.
Yeah, that's true.
So if UFOs were readily available for everyone to see, they would see them, because they're out hunting for them, they're out looking for them. I know ufologists that I've personally told where you can go see a sighting and they still haven't seen anything, which tells me that ET, more than likely, you're catching a glimpse of the craft when they're dropping you off or putting you back. And the more cases we get, the more prominent that becomes. And I do not have a contactee on file today, well, maybe two, that had not remembered seeing a UFO prior to remember being a contactee. So it comes out in the wash. The longer you investigate the case, 90% of the time you're going to find that they've seen something long before they ever knew that they were a contactee.
It could be to explain or answer the logic series of events in terms of identifying abductees.
Yeah, because
but as far as it could be now, though, that things have changed, given the highly perfected censoring and monitoring that certain types of satellites are capable of in terms of monitoring the skies and the craft activity. And I know for a fact that Daryl Sims has been conferring with Ron Berger, who was a satellite technology designer, who came forward into the UFO community to describe a certain type of satellite, reconnaissance satellite, that could be capable of in fact being designed to look for levitation craft activity flying throughout the atmosphere. And it could be that maybe they're tracking the trajectories of crafts and then looking for the human intelligence level of the equation on the ground and putting two and two together. That's plausible. I think that Daryl Sims was conferring with this other researcher along the lines to try and come to a fair assessment about the plausibility of what I'm trying to describe. But that would only be a relatively new development. Prior to that, it was probably just, good old gumshoe work on the part of the intelligence community to find out where sightings were being reported, and then just monitor people that were reporting them, and some more prosaic pedestrian level type of things, or tapping people's phones or whatever it would be.
And they do. Well, these days you're right. We do have a lot more advanced surveillance methods. And I do think, for the people who have seen UFOs that probably aren't contactees, I think in the end they're going to find out that they were government projects and not alien craft. I think a lot of the sightings out on the West Coast and the heartland and the middle parts of the country where we have a lot of black projects running, I think they're going to turn out to be that. And I've been looking at the blimp program, the new design blimp programs. Well, it's not new; they're about 20 years old. We've got blimps now that can reach sizes of 2 and 3 miles. So if these things are moving across the sky at a slow rate and they're all darked out with the exception of a few lights, well, yeah, you're going to think they're alien craft, when in fact, there ain't nothing but a blimp. There's 3 of them that I know of. There's the one for the high-altitude telescope that's going to be 2.2 miles long and 0.5 miles across. And it's got to be that big to withstand the pressures, but this is so they can raise the telescope up to the very top of the atmosphere, look out, but when it needs to be serviced, they don't have to use a space shuttle. They can just bring it back down. The U.S. Navy is working on 2 aerial-type refueling platforms that are blimps. They just sit up there and you can move them around, but they're just basically big fueling stations. They're going to be like 1 mile to 2 miles across. And we know back in the old days with the Hindenburg, they were building them 700, 800 yards, 900 yards long. So, and things like that. And a blimp can be shaped in pretty much any shape you want to make it in. So, I'm real skeptical about a lot of the stuff that gets reported out in the western part of the country. It always amazes me is the UFO activity west of the Mississippi River is 4 times what it is east of the Mississippi River.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you got to kind of stop and wonder about that. Yeah, California has like 5,000 sightings alone. California alone probably has as many sightings as most of the East Coast does. So you got to kind of stop and wonder. There's no way, because the population variants aren't that much different. The East Coast is very heavily populated, just like the West Coast is. Matter of fact, the East Coast is even probably more heavily populated, because you got 25 million in Florida, 36 million in New York, and then all up and down there, 5, 6, 7, 8 million up and down the entire, So I think it's even more heavily populated. So, we get a lot of abduction reports. And we find that basically on the eastern part of the country, abduction and sighting reports kind of correlate. The areas kind of correlate together, and the amount of sightings versus abductions kind of correlates together. Not perfectly by any means, but it does kind of run together. On the West Coast, it's vastly different. It's a vast difference. There's way more sightings than there are cases being reported. And I just have to think that the majority of the sightings out there are government. And a lot of them are hoaxes, like the probe ships that ufology still today wants to hold as gospel. Linda Moulin Howe was running all over the planet with these probe ships. They were obviously CGI, and but still, I think there's a big problem with that. And I think, with some of these cases, we really need to stop and say, wait, what was this craft doing? How did it react? Did it react to people being underneath it? Did it seem to just fade away? Did it move at incredible rates? Stuff like that. Did it appear and disappear? Things along those lines. And I notice in a lot of the cases that's missing these days. They just jump on them. Hey, that's a UFO. Well, yeah, it's unidentified flying object, but it's not an alien craft. And I think that's where people have to distinguish the differences.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I mentioned that myself. Now with the advent of utilitarian levitation craft that's human made, well, that muddies the water. So you don't really know.
That's the thing. It's like the Phoenix Lights case. It's a good case. But we know the government's been working on black triangles for 3 decades.
Yeah.
We know they've been flying them in Belgium, and the one in Belgium was big. It was a big case. It's hard to say that what they saw was alien. The one in Belgium was bigger than the one in Phoenix, Doss, just so you know that.
The one in
it
Belgium
covered the whole city. God.
How can we say it was?
Yeah,
it's
covered the
foolish
whole city.
scientifically to draw any absolute conclusions about such things.
And I'm still not sure the one out in the West wasn't something else. I'm not 100% convinced yet that it wasn't something else. But all these cases have to be looked at. They all have to be investigated. They all have to be dug into thoroughly. But I notice in a lot of the cases these days, they just assume they're alien craft.
No, that's wrong to do that. Not now. Not nowadays.
Because unless ET steps out the craft, it's a big assumption. It really is. I used to kind of agree with everybody on the big craft. Oh, well, they're too big. We could never make that. But after I seen them 2 blimps, I was like, well, that's BS. We can make that easily. And it looks just like a solid craft, especially at night. It looks just like a solid craft because it's blocking out the light behind it. So people make the assumption that it's a big, solid, whatever craft, when in fact. And it's kind of like some of the recent sightings, like the one in Texas. The way they describe that moving has characteristics of some other stuff that I know the government's been working on. I'm real skeptical. And the fact that it was headed towards Bush's ranch and nobody even bothered scrambling a jet suggests that was government, not extraterrestrial, or anything else for that matter. Those kind of little things have to be taken in consideration when they're talking about stuff like this. And they do. They just seem to get left out now. A lot of people just want to assume that everything's ET. And I would honestly think, I'd have to ask Larry Hatch and Peter Davenport what they thought, but I would venture to say probably 10%, maybe 15% of what people see might actually be alien craft. And that's the current estimation for the abduction population, 10 to 15%.
Oh, well.
So it just correlates. It makes better sense to me than, oh, wait, we got all these aliens just floating all over creation, showing everybody. No, I ain't buying it, guys. I'm sorry, I ain't buying it. Y'all got to do better than that. Now, maybe, Randy, we can talk when I'm in to go on a landing on Obama, and I'll buy that one. I see him, Obama out there giving his speech. Here comes the big black triangle, the big saucer ship, and lands down. I say, well, that's got to be real. He just squashed the president. It's got to be real. All right, I'll be nice. I won't hate on Obama. I still don't see my health care. I'm aggravated.
It's just the acclimation process.
Yeah, it is.
There's not enough aliens coming here, and they want to acclimate the population, get them used to the idea of weird, unusual physics, right? The new principles of physics. So we got to butter them up for a few generations with our own craft, and then they'll think that they're the alien craft, and there are alien craft. But overall, it's just kind of like a process where people are becoming increasingly familiar with different realities, different type of phenomena, and I think that's another reason why there's no disclosure, because if they have such technology, by disclosing anything about anything, they would have to in turn be admitting that it's plausible that there were craft saucers or otherwise, or information about such technology, and it would make only good sense that they were pursuing it. So they're not about to admit it overtly yet, and in the meantime, they're just going to confuse you by thinking, by allowing you to think that, our own levitation craft or ET craft.
Well, yeah, because it's the perfect cover-up.
Yeah.
Americans, well, not just Americans, but most people are morons. They look up and say, damn, did you see that? Oh, hell. And they video and picture it, and the government guy's laughing as off. He's going, look, they got calling it as a UFO. And sure enough, they are. And it's a great cover. I told that to people all the time. It's another reason the government will never disclose. You're going to blow one of their best covers. Think about it. The X-117 stealth fighter was reported for, 7 years as a UFO? People out there, they got these new black... Yeah, and the first time I ever seen one, I'm like, gosh, that kind of looks like an airplane, but no, it's a... But that's my point. And then the T-3 started showing up in 89, 88, and then all over the western part of the country, they started showing up. Of course, they were reporting those as UFOs, and or as alien craft, I should say, not UFOs because they are unidentified flying objects, but we know they're not. We know they belong to the government. I personally still don't think the government's building 3-mile across craft out of steel yet, but as far as some of the other kinds, I think they are. And aircraft carriers are quite big, so I think we could build something that big anyway. Maybe a mile, but I think even a mile's pushing it for a solid craft. But if they can do it in a TR-3B and everything works, I don't see why they can't just take it and expand on it. So by now, we're talking 10 years, 15 years later, they might be able to build the bigger craft and route that experience. And of course, we're going to call them in as UFOs. UFO researchers are some of the worst for this, guys. They'll see it out there. Oh, yeah, look, I seen a new UFO. Instead of just saying, you know what, it might be a government and this could be a government craft. But it's like a lot of the old cases when you go backwards and visit them. You can see a lot of that stuff was sensationalized for the point of, well, let's get into mainstream ufology. There wasn't a real other reason for it. That really irritates me, Randy, when I see that, too. It makes me crazy. And I do see a lot of sensationalism in ufology today, and I'm kind of like, gosh, let's stick to the facts. Personally, Randy, I think the facts themselves are so out there and so outstanding that you don't need to sensationalize this subject. We're talking about alien abductions, alien visitation. Why do you need to sensationalize it? You know what I mean? It's pretty damn sensational to start off with. Huh?
It's a human frailty.
Yeah, I guess.
Just like humans are inclined to draw conclusions based on simply assumptions, and we all do it unconsciously.
Oh yeah, we all do it.
And you have to be very self-aware and self-conscious of your own capacity for critical thinking, so that you don't jump to conclusions. Not in this area, because this is the most unusual area. This is the unprecedented area. There's nothing to compare to it at all, as far as the ET presence goes, and in the experience of humans. My feeling, actually, as far as the cover-up, versus the disclosure kind of like controversy, in my opinion, at the top of the list of the evaluation of whether or not to do it by, probably think tanks have been hired years ago. Certainly, the quote-unquote Majestic 12 group was basically a think tank in its own way, because each member represented, a high level of expertise in some other discipline. So if you will look at the MJ12, if there was such a group, and you look at them from the point of view of them being hired as a think tank to evaluate the phenomena itself versus the implications politically, sociologically, psychologically, and in terms of how it would impact on science and engineering, well, then they would be very cautious in advising the powers that be to disclose or not to disclose. They would say, well, there are a lot of ramifications for such an overt declaration. So be very careful on what you do in the future. And so how this development has been impacted upon by the development of our own levitation craft would actually be a new development that they didn't have in the very beginning, but yet another complication in terms of the basic decision of whether or not to do it or not. And I think that as a peer-reviewed criticism or observation of the people who are advocating disclosure within the UFO community, and like I said before, some of them being very prominent in the media to do that, well, it's very clear to me that they haven't thought this through. Because if they did, it would be clear to them as to why it hasn't been what they desire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you were to put yourself in their shoes and realize that the set of priorities obviously would have changed over the years. That's what I just said about this new development of our own levitation craft. And then now perhaps we can't tell the difference, at least generally speaking, for the untrained eye. Someone who may have had sightings and really studied the evidence for the reverse engineering may be able to discern a real ET craft from a human-made craft. And there probably are flight characteristics that could tell you the difference, but most people would not have that background, so they wouldn't be able to tell. But nonetheless, my point is that what does that have to do with? What does that technological development have to do with the decision as to whether or not to disclose or not? And this is a consideration that they're not, in my opinion, they're not addressing these things. All they're doing is saying that we should have it because it's about time that we did.
And see, I agree with you. That irritates the out of me because that's what's going on. We want disclosure. Let's have disclosure, but they're not getting into any of the nuts and bolts of it. It looked like they were for a while there, but I don't know. Well, because you got to kind of wonder about some of these guys. I mean, some of the guys I know are legitimate, and I know they're working hard and they're trying to, make forward progress and stuff. But some of them, I think, Linda tells me all the time that all ufologists go crazy. All old ufologists go crazy. I guess if you're in the field,
they go crazy. It's an occupational hazard.
Yeah, I'm thinking it is because I'm not going to get in a bunch because I've done this on the shows before. But there's about 10 very famous ufologists that in the last 10 years have really, really lost their minds. Like with Greer being the guru. I mean, let me see. I'm going to go pay him $2,500 to be my weekend guru so I can have a spiritual thing with E.T. I can't say this on the air, but I'd have to put the foot somewhere that the sun don't shine. But it ain't going to happen. And what gets me, though, is he's getting people's money for it. And
well, that's just the stage of their own learning curve that they have to go through.
Yeah.
And in fact, let me be very candid about my own experience with Greer, because I took the early version of his training way back in I think it was 1995 maybe, or somewhere time around there. And he came out. He's only really given it in Los Angeles apparently that one time, and he gave it here. And in fact, we went up to an area where we chose to hold the the all-night vigil. The all-night vigil. It was up in an area that was immediately adjacent to an area that I think it was subsequent to that. There were a major site of major sightings, and it just so happens that that particular site was actually an area that there's a company. It's been merged into another company, but years ago, back in the 50s and 60s, it was called Rocketdyne. And Rocketdyne was a major contractor that did rocket engine testing. And where we chose to do our sighting was right adjacent to that. And then sometime after that, there was a major sighting flap that occurred in the same vicinity. And that very night that we were up there, we did have a sighting at close range. It wasn't a craft that was big enough to have anybody in it, but I'm here to tell you that whatever it was a very lightly illuminating orb or sphere that came by really, really close. It was silent, and it must have been, maybe within 3 or 4 feet in diameter. But when we saw it, it was very clear that it was not a plane or any type of normal human operated type of flight vehicle, but sure enough, it flew by, and man, it was really far out, because in this area where we were, kind of like elevated on the side of this hill, you could look down the valley. We live in a valley, and you could see all the airplanes that are coming in, because in the middle of the valley there's an airport, so you could have a good contrast between what we saw close up and compared to other planes or helicopters flying in the distance. And it was very clear it was some kind of a flying orb. How to explain that, I don't know. Where it came from, I don't know. But sure enough, we saw it. And it's a weird experience to see such things. I saw one other one that was like that. But I'm talking about some kind of thing that was flying that was actually, relativistically very small device. And that could be a telltale giveaway for real ET craft, because sometimes you'll hear of sightings where, in association with the main vehicle, there are other smaller, orbs or smaller vehicles that come out from it and then reemerge to it. And I don't think, I don't know for sure, obviously, but it could very well be that that's a telltale to give away real ET sightings, because there has been a history of that, where a larger ET craft will send out kind of like drones from them, but they're also levitation craft, but they're very, very small.
Yeah. I think we done ran ourselves over now, but
yeah,
we're bad about that, Randy. We're bad about that. But before we get out of here, any parting words? Anything you want to tell anybody before we go? Or
well,
I'm not even sure where this 2 hours went, to be honest.
I think that I think the closing words should be that we've only touched on the vast panorama of these issues, and so I think it can only be an unfolding and continuous or open-ended dialogue about all these things, because there's many details that we're trying to bring into our equation of analysis. Because, like as I said before, what Melinda and I have settled on, this is the way I put it, vis-a-vis the human intervention subset of the greater kind of like ufologically oriented set of information. This has provided us with a hypothesis that does explain all these other things, because all these other things fit into it very logically, and with you could say that there's common sense to ascribe to the way these things fit together, and I think that's the sign that our book and our work and our collaborators like you, Joe, are. This is where if you want to hear where real progress is being made, well, it's right here.
It is, and there's a lot going on, but see, that's why I get you on, and we get to chit chat a little bit tonight, and I know we get back and forth on topics, but they're assimilating a lot more information this way. It's getting out there. I know Melinda
of the cover up versus the disclosure, and specifically focus on it, but also always keeping in mind that one of the inspirations and incentives for drawing the conclusions that we're drawing